California landscape and you've never seen this reserve, we have to go. So a couple days later, she and another friend of ours went down, and this was the first time I had actually seen the desert bloom in the state of California. And as you know, the poppy reserve can be really, really windy. So the first day we got there, it was so windy, we couldn't photograph. I was doing film back then. The film wasn't all that fast. So the flowers would have been moving all over the place. So we went to Joshua Tree, went climbing for a while, and then came back and caught a few hours in the poppy reserve at the, at the height of daylight. And just what made this such an unusual year was that the purple bird's eye gilia that you see there were showing as well. You can see that a lot of the poppies were closed up because of the wind. So the bird's eye gilia showed more prominently. And I mean, if you've been there, you know what it's like to stand in front of these fields of poppies and watch waves of wind go over them and smell the flowers. I called Nita that evening. I said, you just have to come down and see this. I don't know how long this is going to last. So I drove back to San Francisco, got Nita, and then we came down and photographed in that area for the next couple of days.
I'm sorry, we've got a little, I have to stop sharing for a moment, I think. I'm stuck here. Oh, stop that. I can't get out. There we go. Sorry about that.
So this is outside the Poppy Reserve, north of Highway 138. I'm not sure whether this is public land or not, but as we went farther into creating the project, we decided we were going to do almost everything we could on public lands instead of going to botanical gardens, because we wanted to show the flowers in their environment and what so many people have worked so hard to protect over the years.
Go ahead. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
And I was going to say, Rob and I grew up in the East Coast, so we had never seen anything like this. And the reason Rob had to come get me was I was a people photographer at the time and had an assignment, so I couldn't come down with him to photograph until he came back and got me. And this just blew our minds. So we said, we have to keep doing this. So we met, about 35 years ago in a photo lab. I was waiting for my prints, and this prince showed up.
Thank you. Thank you.
And I was, as I said, a people photographer. This is a photo I took from the Children of the Tenderloin series that I did up in San Francisco. And Rob's main focus was nature photography.
And so 35 years and about 6 couples counselors later, we're still together. We do a lot of things together. We run our business together. We're very, very different personalities. So we've learned to enjoy each other's difference, and we continue to work on wildflower projects 27, 30 years later.
Yeah, so I stopped doing the people photography and just joined Rob, and we just focused on the wildflowers.
This was the earliest image in the book, was done in 1986, 2 years before I met Nita. I had been looking for a beautiful landscape with a buckeye tree in it, and this is in the Carmel area. I looked around and saw these pretty purple flowers. At that time, I didn't know what they were. I thought, well, might as well put some flowers in the landscape. It'll add a nice color. So like I said, this is the oldest image in the book. It was done on film. And then I had been doing landscape photography for about 35, 40 years at the time. I had also photographed a lot of environmental issues like logging on public lands, water issues, so many environmental issues that became so depressing to photograph. I decided that I wanted to use more of the beautiful images that I had been creating to attract people's attention to conservation issues.
And so this was up and became part of Sequoia National Park, the project Rob was doing for the Trust for Public Land. And he was also getting involved in environmental issues such as mining on public land and the destruction that it was creating, both from the pictures, both from the air and from the ground. And water issues. So we both had used our images to change policies, to raise awareness. And so when we had the Wildflowers, we really wanted to continue that work. So the image on the left I took when I was actually a firefighter for CDF at the time, now CAL FIRE. And the smoke was so black because they were really large tires from land moving equipment that was burning up north of Leggett near the Eel River. And on the right was the Children of the Tenderloin series that I had mentioned earlier. And that launched my career photographing children and creating healthy communities. On the left is a powwow in San Francisco, which was hand colored by another artist, Taya Schrack, and used for the Children's Defense Fund calendar. And I did a number of their calendars over the years. And on the right is a representation of a 7-foot banner. I did series called The Faces of different communities in the Bay Area that celebrated diversity, ethnic diversity, age diversity, sexual preference, lifestyle, etc.
So this image was taken when we were photographing in the Carson Pass area, which is south of Lake Tahoe, maybe about 20 minutes south. What our understanding is, this is an area where a few ecoregions converge. And so this particular area had quite a variety of alpine and subalpine plants. Right here, we're at about 9,000 feet. This is Winnemucca Lake. We packed in there for a few days. I was carrying 85 pounds of gear, 35 pounds of it was camera equipment, and Nita was carrying 65 pounds. And this allowed us to stay up there and, be there late in the day and early in the morning to get as many floral portraits as we could.
And this was one of the years which was we were experiencing the heavy swings now with climate change that was starting to create really drought years as well as really heavy snow years in the mountains. And Wildflowers were 3 to 4 weeks late that year because there was so much snow in that area. And in order to be able to pay for the work we were doing, we were fortunate to connect with an art consultant who really loved our work. And she started using our work in hospitals, which was great for us also because it was they were used for healing people.
So wherever we could, we tried to get California wildflower images into these healthcare environments. That image is represents a technique that I developed to photograph wildflowers. It's called the contact series, as opposed to strict, sharp, botanical type portraits. And we'll talk more about that later when we take you behind the scenes as to how we actually work in the field.
Yeah, this is actually phlox photographed in that same process. And these are 8-foot tall, 20-foot wide lobby dividers. And there were 34 images built into this Kaiser Redwood City Medical Center. The first time we had gone so large with our work. And we found that we can photograph wildflowers 12 months of the year, but there aren't as many. And in the winter. So we like to go out to the different preserves. This is Woodbridge Preserve near Sacramento to photograph wildlife and the birds. And this also got used, is used as fine art prints as well as in the hospitals. And this is Merced National Wildlife. And unfortunately, we don't have a recording for you because the sound is just amazing.
So people ask us, what is the most beautiful wildflower bloom you've seen? What really blew you away and, just kept you going, looking for more super blooms? Well, in 2003, above the town of Gorman, around Tehachapi Pass, I'm sure many of you know where that is, we learned that there was an incredible bloom that people hadn't seen for years. I started living out in LA in 1966, and I've been driving up and
Can everyone make sure that they are muted? W's iPad, I don't think you're muted. We're hearing some sound. Thank you.
And so we learned that this area was blooming prolifically. So Nita and I drove down here and we discovered that a mile and a half wide, and from the freeway up to the top of the ridge, which was about 1,200 feet, was just completely covered with quite a variety of flowers. So this image was taken on public land, looking across, looking east. The freeway would be down below, out of sight. This is Hungry Valley State Recreation Area in the foreground, and the background is private ranch land.
That we hope someday will get protected.
And what made this really interesting and also challenging to photograph was the fact that we were photographing at the tail end of a storm. So there would be, fog or low clouds coming in over the scene. Sometimes there'd be little shafts of light highlighting certain areas on the ridges. So the scene, it was constantly changing, not only as far as light goes, but also, when you look north or south, everything was so beautiful. Sometimes it was just really hard to make a decision on what it was to photograph. So this was the most amazing bloom we've seen. I haven't seen that showy and the flowers that abundant since we photographed that back then in 2003.
But a close second was Carrizo Plain back in 2017 during their super bloom. And this was taken coming over the Tembler Mountains from the Bakersfield side into the valley. And one of the things I loved about this photograph was how it showed the difference between north-facing slopes and south-facing slopes. And on the other side of Carrizo Plain were the Caliente Mountains. And we had seen very few desert candles up to this point over our 27 years. And somebody in the campground said, oh, you've got to go up into the Caliente Mountains and take a look at the desert candles.
So the Caliente Mountains border the Carrizo Plain on the west side. They get more moisture than the plain does because they're closer to the coast. And so from one side of the Carrizo Plain to the other was quite a difference in different floral species. And so people ask, well, do you have a favorite wildflower? Well, my favorite wildflower is the desert candle. It's such an unusual plant. It's a member of the mustard family. The stem is a hollow tube, and it glows when it's backlit. And then you've got all these beautiful magenta buds. And as the buds mature and the flowers blossom, you have these beautiful little white flowers, and all supported by these green leaves. So it's better to me the most unusual plant, and it's my favorite wildflower.
And as we were coming down off of the Caliente Mountains and looking east back towards the Temblers, and on the other side of the Temblers again is Bakersfield, you get a sense of how massive this area is.
And how extensive the bloom was. And the bloom, so again, we're looking east. The bloom went way off to the north and then way down to the south. Farther in the south, there were beautiful, purple phacelia that dominated the color of the landscape.
And this is a detail down in the flats. And this is a photo, the one photo in our book that was taken with an iPhone 6. And we figured out there were probably 12 different cameras used over the 27 years. And a part of the book, we wanted to share how we were creating the images. And this is a section called Behind the Scenes.
So basically, there are three different ways that I've photographed floral portraits in the field, and we do everything in the field using natural light with the flowers safe and sound in the ground. And if it means, there's a flower we want, but we can't photograph it without disturbing what the surrounding landscape is and plants are, we won't do it. So on the left-hand page in the upper left-hand corner is what we call a botanical portrait. We isolate the flower from its setting in the background, putting black or white backgrounds behind the flower. And the purpose is to avoid any distractions and show the flower in the best light. After doing that.
Well, and did we talk about natural light?
Yeah, everything is done in the field using natural light. We use natural light because instead of using strobe, we found there are so many different qualities of light, from direct sunlight to diffuse light, that we can use to show the beauty of the flower. So after putting black or white backgrounds behind the plants for a while, using fabric, I decided, well, what if I take the folds of the fabric and try to add another graphic or compositional element to the overall scene that'll complement the shape of the flowers, or their leaves, or generally complement the whole composition. So I called this the Wrap series.
And we love inspiring people to go out and experiment. And we had a wonderful story from someone who saw this talk, who was up in Oregon at the time, and her friends had fabric from Christo's running fence that ran through Marin County. And they took that fabric out into the garden and started wrapping flowers in the garden to take pictures. And we just thought that was a really fun story to hear.
So all the previous two types of image that have been done most of the time with a tripod. It takes us a while to set up the tripod on the ground and get just the right angle and the right composition. I got, I wanted to go beyond that. So I was able to develop a technique called the contact series, where I'm hand holding the camera. It's a more spontaneous and unpredictable process. I've found a way to safely get the flower petals gently in touch with a filter over the lens. And what happens is, because the camera and the lens is blocking the light falling on to the blossom, the light that's used to make the exposure is coming from what's behind the flower. And so you get this nice kind of soft transmitted light. And there's a very, very short depth of field, or very little that's in focus. And so it adds another abstract quality to a beautiful, colorful image. And it's just another way to interpret the beauty of all our diverse California species. I always make sure that there's something in focus to give some sense of reality and sharpness. It's a really challenging way to do it, because just moving the camera slightly changes the position of the petals uh, that I'm seeing through the viewfinder. And so it takes a lot of different attempts to get something that really works, but it's more playful and it got me off the tripod.
And this is, he's using a wide angle lens with a filter on it so you don't get pollen all over your lens, and with an extension tube on the back, which allows you to focus really close.
So this is the longest image that took the longest time to photograph this. We were in Anza Borrego Desert State Park. Nita had seen this beautiful desert lily the evening before, and it was too late to photograph, so we decided we'd come back early in the morning. When we came back, the light was really, really low because it was that early in the morning, and so the part of the flower facing the sun was brightly illuminated, but the other side was in shadow, so we had to bounce light into the part that was in shadow. That time I was using film. You can see I'm holding a Polaroid. I had a Polaroid back on the top, on the back of my film camera, so I could see my exposure, I could see my composition. Then we had to bounce more light in to the front. So this took us 2.5 hours. That was with film. Now, obviously, with digital photography, we can see what we're getting right away.
But
No,
the average is still about 45 minutes to an hour
yeah.
per image.
So that's what we ended up with, using film and all the different things we use to control the natural light.
Which included this pile of jackets and camera bags on the left side were actually put there in order to block the sun from hitting the sand and the leaves, so that they wouldn't become distracting. We live 5 miles north of the Golden Gate Bridge in Marin County. And so it's a great place for biodiversity and public lands.
40% of Marin is protected public land.
And I'm really fortunate. I have amazing eyesight. I was called Eagle Eyes as a kid, so I'm really good at finding flowers. And Rob is such a sweetheart and carrying most of the equipment. He normally would carry 65 pounds of equipment, reflectors and camera equipment. I would carry about 25 pounds. And he was willing to put himself into really uncomfortable positions in order to get the image. And was also great with composition. So it became his, hers, and ours as far as the making of images. And I always had the opportunity to look at an image after it was done and give my feedback, or after his first attempts, and give my feedback if there was anything I would change. And we just met someone from Alaska today who says that she's got calypso orchids up in Alaska as well.
She lives in Fairbanks. So this was when we were using film. Nita had found this image. This is on public land, Ring Mountain Open Space Preserve, that has a beautiful selection of flowers. It's not too far from us. It's about 10 minutes up the road. Nita had found this flower, and I came back the next day. You can see that we use all sorts of things to protect the flower from the wind. And this was a nice overcast day in March. I had photographed the flower, and about 5 minutes after I had packed up, it started raining. But
it started to pour, actually.
So in the springtime, we get nice clouds that naturally diffuse the light, and we don't have to use diffusers that we'll show you later to control the light.
So you don't have to have fancy equipment to work with. And I couldn't help him that day because I was in traffic school because I had gotten a ticket. And this was the result.
So as I said before, we'll put black or white backgrounds. behind the plant. We'll experiment and see whether we like black or white, and make that decision after we have the files back at home and look at them on the computer. So that's why it can take us so long to just do one particular species.
And as Rob mentioned, we're very careful about not doing damage. So often we're photographing off the edge of a trail or a road. And if we can't access a plant without doing damage, we won't. And this is the Indian pink up on Mount Tam. And often we'll look at, what angle can we photograph a flower from that's not always the same angle. Sometimes from behind is just as interesting. And if it's really windy, we'd have to set up a wind break, a wind tent.
This was a beautiful Franciscan paintbrush, Golden Gate National Recreation Area on the Marin County side of GGNRA. And I started out photographing most of the plant. And as I looked closer, did a few different versions, I noticed that the very top of the plant looked like it just looked like flames. So we weren't always wanting to get the entire blossom. It was more about giving an impression of the beauty and sometimes abstracting it to give a different feeling of different blossoms.
And some of these flowers have wonderful fragrance. If you haven't experienced the Western azalea, if you ever get a chance to be around it, the fragrance is just wonderful. And this is the stage road on the way up to the West Point Inn, a place that we would go and volunteer a lot, and was a wonderful place for photographing. So either on the way in or the way out, we often would photograph. And I forgot what I was going to say about that, but that's okay. Right. So these seemed like they were dancing.
So this is Nita's image of a beautiful iris in Plumas National Forest near the town of Oroville.
Quincy.
Oh, Quincy, thank you.
And that's the 2-page spread in the book.
So again, our focus was what was on public land. We wanted to show people what existed in these different ecosystems. So this is a diffusion disc that we use to control the light falling on the plant. And with the diffusion disc, even though it's soft light, depending on what angle we place the disc in relative to the plant, we can control the light. So there is some feeling of direction of light on the plant. We don't always do it that way. Sometimes we do, or sometimes we'll do it multiple ways and just to experiment.
As you can see, we're again right on the edge of the road. And also depending on the distance from the flower that you put the diffusion disc, your light will change. And then we add a reflector in front of the camera to bounce light back in so that you don't have any deep shadows. And then we loved having the diffusion disc behind it because it made the flower glow, seemed to glow from the inside out. And this is Ring Mountain. Rob had mentioned it earlier. It's this wonderful preserve in Corte Madera. That's Mount Tamalpais in the background. Again, the RAP series. And this area was preserved mainly, it's great for wildflowers in general, but mainly because of the Tiburon Mariposa lily that grows nowhere else but on Ring Mountain.
There are a few small populations of this beautiful, strange Calochortus. So we loved photographing in the alpine and subalpine regions of the Eastern Sierra. We hiked up to Morgan Pass. You could drive up to, on a paved road to about 10,000 feet. And then we hiked up all our gear up to Morgan Pass. And again, we wrapped the plants or put something behind them to eliminate the distracting or chaotic background. Took this on the way back.
And again, trying to work with the folds. We found the best fabric to work with was chiffon, but it's really lightweight. It gives you these wonderful gentle folds. It's really lightweight. So if you have much of a breeze, it'll change it. It'll change the pattern, and then you have to sort of start over again.
Sometimes it takes more time to get the folds right than it does to actually get the composition of the blossom right. And then, like we said before, sometimes we'll photograph a flower in direct sunlight because there are certain things that might show up, and then photograph the same flower using a diffuser, and you get a very, very different feeling. So that's why it takes so much time, because we're always playing around and almost never know when to stop. Another question we get frequently asked is, well, how much Photoshop work do you do? Well, we photograph and in the raw file format. The sensors on the camera are designed to capture as much highlight detail and as much shadow detail as possible. So the raw image out of the camera is often very, very flat, and
which means low contrast.
Which means low contrast. And so our goal is to bring it back to what it was we saw. In this particular scene, the area was in shade. The only source of light was blue skylight falling on the whole scene. So it's a very cool looking scene. If you look at the very, very top right in the middle, you can see kind of a bright yellow. That's the only place where the sun was. So this was what the camera recorded.
It's both low contrast and low saturation, right, as well.
Right. And so this was pretty much what we saw. And so everything has to go through Photoshop so that we can accurately represent what it was we saw, accurately represent the colors of the flowers and what their colors are, whether they're soft or really, really saturated.
And we can't always get a perfectly white background or black background. So we will go into Photoshop and clean up the background, but we always start with black or white. And this is a 2-page spread in the book, 2 types of lilies. And often it will be windy. So you need to not only block the wind, but in this case, you needed to block the sand from blowing around.
So we had all these rocks that were set on the fabric to keep the fabric from keep the fabric from blowing around. So this was what the camera saw. There wasn't much contrast that the camera recorded, but this particular eriogonum had a lot of beautiful, intense red-tipped buds at the ends of these little stems.
And as you can see, there's sand on there. There's also a seam from the 2 different pieces of fabric because this was so close to the ground. And this is how it came out after being in Photoshop and cleaned up and more saturation put back in, more contrast. And again, the 2-page spread. So we're dealing with out in the field, we're dealing with heat, we're dealing with occasionally cold, we're dealing with rain. And in Utah in particular, we were dealing with bugs. They were awful in
no-see-ums.
In Utah. We started in Capitol Reef and there were no-see-ums. which if you don't know what they are, they're smaller than mosquitoes. They itch worse than mosquitoes, and they crawl into any opening they can find, your ears, your nose, under your clothes. So got to a point where I had to go find my clean underwear in the car so we could get some better protection. And they found us in the middle of nowhere within about 3 minutes.
And one thing I learned, I mean, we were just surprised. It was almost like they had followed us every place we were going. Well, after doing a little bit of research on no-see-ums, I learned that that the bugs that are about the size of small fruit flies use the plant for use the blossom for the nectar, but they need blood to be able to fertilize their eggs when
to
they
reproduce.
To reproduce. So and they can bite multiple times in the same place. And so you can imagine I'm on the ground with a flower and the bugs are getting in everywhere, and it's just something you just got to go you just have to go through to get the images that you want. But fortunately we haven't encountered any of that in our travels throughout the state.
Yeah, and this was poor Rob. He must have had over 200 bites on him, and they were just driving him crazy.
But it's worth it.
So in 2015, we met the curator of the Jewett Gallery at the San Francisco Public Library, and she asked us to put in a proposal to, we had already started a project, named the project Beauty and the Beast, Wildflowers and Climate Change, because we were photographing throughout the West. And she asked us to do an exhibit that focused on California. And this was our first joint exhibit, and we had 100 images. And CNPS helped us with the regional map that's in the back, on that back wall, and is also in the book. We had fun putting together a lot of our flower guides, and one of the things we found really helpful are binoculars when you're going looking for flowers, and also these knee pads that were like kneeling in stiff jello. So I put a few things in the chat, which includes the name of these knee pads or the company where you can find them. And you folks are down in Southern California, or most of you. The San Diego Natural History Museum has a large print exhibit called California Blooming, Wildflowers and Climate Change in the Golden State. And that has been extended to, I think, the beginning of October. And the other original traveling exhibit, which came out of the first one we showed, which has 52 images, is now at the Jewish Community Center in San Francisco, and travels, has been traveling throughout the state. So if you know of any place in LA, because it hasn't been in LA proper itself, we'd love to see it get there if anyone has any suggestions. So to expand upon what we were doing in the exhibit, which was to inspire hope and action and educate people about climate change, species extinction, and the need for land conservation, we decided to do a companion coffee table book. So that came after the exhibit. And these are the 16 different authors that we commissioned short stories.
For years, we had wanted to do a book. We had done different prototypes. The first title for the book was Impressions of Spring, a voice for wildflowers of the West, because at that time we had been photographing all over the West, but we changed the title to what it is, Beauty and the Beast, California Wildflowers is Climate Change, because over the 30 years we've been photographing, climate change has become more and more important, and we wanted to address that as well as other conservation issues in the book. So as Nita might have said, we have 18 short stories by 16 different authors. Most of them are women, and we wanted to include as much diversity, age, and ethnicity as we could. We wanted to give a voice to so many different people. every short story, most of the short stories are about 1,200 words. So they're short stories, and they were done in the first person style. So each person that has written the essay or the short story is talking about his or her own experience in their career or in their field of study.
And some of you may know Gordon Leppick, who is a biologist for the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. And he talks about wildflowers and climate change. Ryan Burnett, who's with Conservation Blue, Point Blue Conservation Science, is doing research on the effects of climate change on the rufous hummingbird, as well as the mountain meadows. And he wrote this wonderful story about the relationship and how climate change and the phenology, or the science of timing, is changing when wildflowers bloom, and really affecting the ability of the rufous hummingbird to migrate, do its epic migration from Mexico to the Northwest, or even into Canada.
The flowers have to be blooming at just the right time when the birds are arriving, so the bird can continue its long journey. So this image is probably the luckiest image we've gotten in all the 30 years we've been photographing wildflowers. We were photographing this beautiful, tall scarlet fritillary. This is in Upper Table Rocks. It's BLM and Nature Conservancy land in Oregon.
Southern Oregon.
Southern Oregon. We included this flower in the book because it also blooms in California. So we had been waiting for the breeze to stop moving these three flowers on a long stalk. Nita was standing there holding the background and holding the diffusion disc. Her feet are getting tired because we're waiting so long. I have the shutter on a fast speed to stop the movement. I was looking through the view camera, through the camera viewfinder with my finger on the remote shutter release. The bird flew in, I got 2 frames, and it left. And we waited there, for another 20 minutes, hopefully to get, more of the birds coming back to these flowers, but never came back. So the image on the right is the raw file. That was what the camera recorded. And then once we took the thing into Photoshop and we corrected everything, that is what we saw and what we wanted to represent.
And we work with now Sony cameras that have very large sensors, 42 megapixels and 36 megapixels. And that's why we were able to take an image that was originally a vertical, crop it, and still be able to create a 44 by 55 inch print. And it was still sharp. And we had initially started doing that because of the hospital work we were doing. And sometimes pollinators are very cooperative and even let us put a black background behind it.
We started photographing the flower on this beautiful blue dix with just the regular background behind it out of focus. And I said, well, why don't we get the background out? And then the butterfly was really patient. So we were really fortunate to get that.
Susan Twite, who's a nature writer, wonderful nature writer, wrote a story on the 5 deserts in California. Robin Wall Kimmerer, who many of you may know from her book, Braiding Sweetgrass, is a Native American botanist and professor. And she wrote a wonderful story called What's in a Name, and sort of followed the different types of naming of plants from her grandmother to Carlos Linnaeus to now the DNA changing of names as well.
So this image was photographed again with a big diffusion disc, but we wanted some feeling of the direction of the light. So you can probably tell that the diffuser was on the right-hand side, and some of the areas on the left-hand side are a little bit more in shadow. So we have a great ability to control what the lighting is, and that's why we don't use strobes.
Wendy Takuda, who was a local news anchor, when she retired, got involved in restoration work and pulling broom. And she wrote a very funny story called Zen in the Art of Pulling Broom. Amber Paris is down in San Diego with the Climate Alliance, and wrote the story about talking to children about climate change without scaring them.
Can you go back? I just want to talk a little bit about this image. This was found out in Point Reyes National Seashore. It's a widely spread image in the northern hemisphere. It's
spread flower, you mean?
Yeah, and it's about an inch in diameter. It's got this beautiful iridescent appearance to these petals, and I just wanted to bring that out and make the flower really, really big, because it just seemed like the thing was glowing.
And Snowdy mentioned earlier that Genevieve Arnold had spoken at one of the events, and this is her story about seed banking.
So we've also done quite a lot in the area of fire recovery we were talking about earlier before we gave our presentation. And it's just really fascinating to see what comes up. This is in Cleveland National Forest up above Lake Elsinore. I don't know what the name of the fire was, but it was just fascinating to see these beautiful plants coming back to life out of this charred landscape.
And this was up in Lake County. And again, you get the right rains, you have the ashes fertilizer, and when the canopy is burned away, these plants get sun that they weren't getting. And this is only 6 months after the fire up in Lake County. And the bulbs especially like these conditions.
This whole field had just been charred. If you looked at the soil beneath these plants, it was all blackened, and these flowers came up, like Nina said, 6 months later, and completely covered the landscape.
And it's nice because you don't have the old thatch either. It just completely cleans the area out. So you can see the variety.
This whole area had been burned. This is Pepperwood Preserve in Sonoma County, which is probably about half an hour, 45 minutes north of us. You can see in the upper left-hand corner that the trees had all been burned. I walked through this area only on invasive grasses so I could get this photograph.
So several of the other flowers we found, and we did not put these two together. They were already hanging out together. We love the contrast. And then we'll quickly take you through some of our favorite areas in the deserts. This is series from Death Valley.
This is on the Artist Drive in Death Valley.
And the two images before, this was during a super bloom. The whole valley had been filled with flowers, but when you move to a different area, the plants could be a lot scarcer.
And so you can see Nita always carries a tripod with her.
But I don't use it very often.
So this was this beautiful desert broom rape, which is totally a parasitic plant. And it had just this intense purple color to it.
And when we can find pollinators or other insects living on the plants, such as this crab spider, we always like to include them. This was from our first trip, our first 100-year bloom in Death Valley.
1998.
And 7 years later, they had another 100-year bloom. And then they had another, well, they stopped calling them 100-year blooms. At that point, they started calling them super blooms because they, with our change in weather, they were happening more often. But meanwhile, the dry years were really stressing out the native plants as well. So this is Joshua tree.
So we also like doing ground details. This was a typical rain year in a typical wash in the southern part of Joshua Tree, where you'd see occasionally these beautiful Canterbury bells scattered up and down the wash. Well, in 1998, when we were in Joshua Tree, it was an El Nino year, an abundant rain year, and the flowers just grew. There was such a seed bank in this granitic soil in Joshua Tree that came to life. The rain was not only abundant, but it was scattered over a long period of time. So the flowers grew much taller than they normally do and put many more blossoms out. I mean, unfortunately, you can't see the whole frame because of the little stuff on the side here, but
Well, it depends on where you have that.
it was just something we had never seen before.
And then you need to get to know your plants too. For example, the Desert 5 spot starts closing up at about 2:30, 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So don't take a nap first and think you have plenty of time to do it.
Which is what we did.
So I had to go find another one, another year and do it. Desert chicory is just really interesting photograph.
So we had a diffuser over this, and then we bounced light back into the whole flower to give it a sense of the flower kind of glowing. I mean, the whole plant.
And then Anza Borrego Desert State Park. This is the southern end. We particularly liked the southern end because there were fewer people there.
This was back in 2005. And we're always looking for interesting backgrounds for the flowers to show where they are in the environment.
Again, the desert lily on the right, and then a desert chicory, which is about the size of a dandelion. And Rob approached it in from a very different angle and very Art Deco-ish. And we went back in 2005. Is it 2005, I think?
Yeah.
And we had some rain 9 out of 12 days we were there. So it was great to see fog in the desert.
So this is where it all started 27 years ago. No, what?
No, 1992.
30 years ago in the Antelope Valley, California Poppy Reserve. This was taken probably 10, 15 years after the first image, way back when. And like I said before, we like doing ground detail. So there's so many beautiful ways to photograph our state's amazing biodiversity. We just feel so fortunate to have been able to see so much of the state.
And again, as I mentioned, we want to do this. We created this project to also help protect what's out there and educate people on what they can do to make a difference. And as members of CNPS, I'm sure you all know about how important it is to vote, plant local natives, join your local chapter of CNPS or any type of native plant group, donate to climate change and conservation organizations, and volunteer to support restoration work. Become citizen scientists, or some groups call it community science, with iNaturalist and Nature's Notebook. You know, it could be any age to do that.
Some of the plants that we photographed, as I mentioned earlier, with the scarlet fritillary and the desert hummingbird, some of these plants have been photographed out of state, but the flowers on that, I mean, those species also live in the state. So we wanted to put these flowers in if we hadn't photographed them in California.
Interesting backgrounds, stone backgrounds, if we can.
This is serpentine, which many of you may recognize. It's the state rock.
On the right is from North Table Mountains near Chico, which is one of our favorite places. But with social media now, as you know, with what happened at Lake Elsinore, places get flooded with people, and it's not the same experience we had a couple of decades ago. So these are some of the 2-page spreads that we found that we have in the book. It took us 3 years to actually put the book together. And as I'm sure most of you know, but in case you don't, plantid.net is a great place, especially if you're starting out, to identify plants. CalFlora, if you have more experience and want to dive in deeper. And then, of course, CNPS's wonderful calscape.org and the garden planner. We're always telling people, you want to plant natives, please try to do local natives whenever possible. And this is a great website for figuring out what to grow where. And Wildflower Reports, Theodore Payne Foundation, especially for Southern California, has a wonderful wildflower hotline. CNPS's Facebook page has a lot of people making reports, and desertusa.com. And we're just going to finish up with a few of the 2-page spreads. California's wonderful orchids. And the map that I mentioned on the ecological regions.
The book has a glossary in it for the people who don't know a lot of the terms that might have been used in the different essays.
And 2 indices, one for plant names and one for locations. And we have a regular edition book and also a deluxe signed limited edition book. And we encourage people to check them out and help support our work that we are continuing. And if you get the regular edition book or already have it, there's actually a surprise underneath the paper jacket cover. So if you peel it back, you'll find a different cover on the hard cover of the book. Actually, this is it. When we save other species, we're actually saving ourselves.
So thank you for sticking with us all this time. We hope you enjoyed not only the images, but our story as to how we got them. As Nita said earlier, you can, if you go to wildflowerbooks.com, that's the book's website. There are a lot of resources there. And as David Brower said, truth and beauty can still win battles. We need more art, more passion, and more wit in defense of the earth. And you all know that.
So thank you for joining us, and we look forward to answering any of your questions.
Well, I've been keeping track of the chat questions, so can I ask those first?
Absolutely.
Sure.
Someone asked, I think, I'm paraphrasing this, but somebody was admiring your photos, and it sounded like they were asking, are any of the photos for sale as art prints as opposed to buying the book?
Absolutely. Everything, all our prints are custom created. So to fit whatever you want. So we're just shipping out a print actually for a Mother's Day present. It's a little late, but the mother knows about it, from somebody who saw the exhibit at the San Diego Natural History Museum. So feel free to contact us. You can take a look at some of we'll put our other website, which is winterbadger.com, where you can see other work as well. Not just the wildflowers, if you happen to be interested in birds or trees, etc. So,
Can I answer a few?
or do you want to wait for her to go through?
Okay, well, you can.
Someone, now this is my question, because there's going to be a lot of questions that deal with technology. Do you offer photography classes?
No, we don't. Sorry.
But
Okay.
we are open to talking to people if they do have
Sure.
questions.
Okay, because there are several questions here about, okay, first one, were you shooting 35 millimeter format for everything but the iPhone? Or did you use another medium or format film?
Well, I started out using medium format film, a Hasselblad camera. It created an image 2¼ by 2¼ inches square that, gave a whole lot more detail than a regular 35 millimeter film camera. The cameras that we're using now that are digital are full frame Sony cameras that are the same size as 35 millimeter film cameras. So I hope that answers the person's.
Yeah, and I started out
question.
with 35 millimeter film.
Yeah.
Another film technique, narrow apertures or focus stacking to get depth of field in landscapes with flowers in the foreground?
For focus stacking with floral portraits, when you're that close with a macro lens, you need another piece of equipment, sliding rail, because when I change where I'm focusing on the flower with the macro lens I have, it will either magnify it if I'm getting closer, or it will, to focus on a different part of the flower, or it'll make it smaller if I'm photographing toward the front of the flower. So it gets much more complicated than focus stacking doing a landscape. So I tried it. I tried using a focusing rail, and it took so much more time, because every time I'm having to wait for the wind to die down. And so what I use is a camera of an old Canon 50 millimeter lens, and I try to use f/16 because that's probably the sharpest aperture, but I'll sometimes go up to f/22 to get more depth of field. I lose a little bit of sharpness. And what's nice with these big sensors on these digital cameras, I can photograph farther back, but then which means I'm going to get more in focus. Because I'm farther back, but then I can crop in because I've got a large sensor and still make really big prints and preserve a lot of the detail. So I hope that answers the question.
Well, also he was asking about landscapes. So focus stacking is easier to do when you've got landscapes than it is with the portraitures, as long as you don't have too much wind.
Yeah, it's the the depth of field in landscapes with flowers in the foreground, I guess is.
Yeah, so focus
Yeah.
stacking is one way to
Yeah.
be able to accommodate that, especially if you're working with a longer lens.
Somebody asked in that photo that, and you showed it in two different versions, the photo with the lichen covered conifers, what was the white flowering shrub?
Serviceberry.
So yeah, serviceberry.
Yes.
That we photographed in the Columbia River Gorge. And
On
I,
the on the Oregon side.
And your secret cover, is that a yellowish California poppy?
yeah, we find up here, I don't know if this happens down in your coast, but the closer you get to the coast, the yellower the poppy is, which, I mean, it almost looks like a different species in the same species that you find out in, out in Antelope Valley, California Poppy Reserve. It's just, we've seen flowers that kind of grade from totally orange into almost pure yellow with a little bit of an orange center. I mean, the closer we get up here to the coast, the more yellow is seen in the four petals.
And sometimes triangular, diamond shaped orange in the middle. Can I answer one question that just came up? Because I want to make sure everybody gets this, because I forgot to mention it. Someone asked whether we're working on a new book. Not right now, not a new book. We may do some children's books related to flowers, but the one thing that we're raising funds for right now is to create an audio described version of this book for the visually impaired. So imagine that you can't see the flowers. We wanted to create a way for the visually impaired to be able to enjoy the experience.
Oh.
And we're a sponsored project of marinlink.org. If you're interested in, or know somebody who might be interested in supporting the project. And I'll put that in the chat as well. And some of the information we put in the chat was at the very beginning, so you may have to go all the way to the top to see some of it.
Here's another question that just came in. How do your photographs, the image itself and the process of getting the image, change the way you perceive individual plants or landscapes?
Well, that's a really important question to answer. As a landscape, starting out as a landscape photographer, for me, it was like the overall landscape, and flowers or plants were kind of a texture and added wonderful detail. But as we photographed, as I started doing more macro work, it really slowed me down a lot. And I'm grateful for that, because I was paying more attention to what was actually living there and seeing the relationships to things. For example, we were photographing in a watch in Joshua Tree. We were photographing the prince's plume or something like that. We were looking for a variety of flowers. We were there for about 4 hours, and there was a mockingbird that really just about serenaded us the whole time. So if I had been a landscape photographer, I probably wouldn't have stayed there for very long. After I've gotten my composition. But being a macro photographer, we're just spending so much time in one place, looking at one flower. And what that also taught me was really reinforced my idea of the value of the individual plant. When you realize that each plant has its own biological heritage that goes how many thousands of years back, and what had to happen for this plant to exist at this particular point in time, it really reminded me of the value of any individual of any species, whether it's plant or animal, as opposed to the whole, well, it's only valuable when it's rare. No, every plant has its place and its relationship to everything else in its natural community. So that's what photographing wildflowers, taught me and helped me focus on. It just gave me a better appreciation of, what I had loved for so many years, but not really paid so much detail and intense attention to and appreciation of. So thank you for that question. I really appreciate that.
And he tends to kiss the flowers after he's spent 45 minutes looking through the viewfinder and thanks them.
Yeah, one of the reasons I started doing that is because I always wanted to gently feel what the texture of the petal was, because some plants have really stiff petals or things on them, and some of them are really delicate. And I found there are some petals I was touching that I couldn't get much of a sensation for, but because we have more sensitivity in our lips, I figured, well, what does this feel like if I touch it with my lips? So out of gratitude, I started kissing these flowers after spending so much time photographing them and just telling them thank you.
Yeah, marvelous, wonderful. I think I covered all of the questions in the chat.
Except there's a question about the 5 deserts.
So there are
Yeah.
Yeah, there are 5 California deserts. I mean, I really did research on the last one. There's the Great Basin Desert, there's the Mojave Desert, there's the Sonoran Desert, and there's the Coloradan Desert, which I guess is different from the Sonoran, but I guess still part of it. And then we learned that there is the San Joaquin Desert, and it was declared a desert not because of the amount of rainfall, which so many people think is, what defines a desert is the amount of moisture it gets, but it's more, as we're doing more research, what the plants are in different desert communities. And, some of the research I've said that the San Joaquin Desert comes really pretty far north, almost into the eastern part of the Bay Area. So if you look up San Joaquin Desert, I've seen it classified as a real desert, and some people are calling it a sub-desert or something like that. But yeah, I was surprised to learn that.
Okay. Yeah, I'd never heard of that term either. Is the Chihuahuan the same as the Sonoran?
I don't think so. I may be wrong, but I'm just familiar with the Sonoran and the Coloradan.
Okay.
Snowdy, I think the Chihuahuan is in Texas.
Okay.
I think
All
you're
right.
right. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, because I just I put something in the chat because I looked something up online, Googled it, of course, and that Chihuahuan was what came up as that. No, San Joaquin came up as a 5th. It seems like the 3 main are Mojave, Colorado, and Great Basin, right? And then there's Sonoran. Sonoran and San Joaquin.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
San Joaquin is a newer one as
Well,
far as being identified as I think it's a desert.
Yeah, what we loved about, and I'm sure you're all aware of this, what we love about Joshua Tree is it's got 2 different deserts in it. As far as I know, that's the only park in the state that has that.
Yeah, that's true. They two deserts meet in that park, right? Anybody else have in-person questions that they want to ask?
And thank you for all the nice words that we heard and
Yeah,
Carl's great story about having seen the exhibit in San Francisco when we first had it back in 2016.
Yeah, someone asked, when will the next super bloom be? Boy, I wish I had that. I wish I had that crystal ball.
We thought we were heading into it with all the rain that we had
early in the year,
but
because everyone's talking about a drought here. We're just, like we said, we're just north of the Golden Gate Bridge. I've been looking at rainfall, I mean, recording rainfall for maybe 15 years. We get here an average of about 26 inches of rain. This year we've had about 34, but almost all of that came up until December. We were having an average of half of December, half of the days in December, we had rain, but everything dropped off in January and February, a little bit in March. We got some in April, but so even though, we're a drought, we got more rainfall this year than I've averaged over 15 years. But the year before that, we got half of it. So,
And we were lucky, it refilled our reservoirs here in Marin County. The reservoirs were down to 37% and went up to 93% in 2 storms. So.
Yeah, it's the erratic thing that we're experiencing. And at the very beginning of this, we were talking, and, I've been to tons of wildflowers this year down here in Southern California, when you would have expected that it would have been a really crummy year.
yeah.
But the rain came all at the right place.
Yeah.
Carolyn West has a question.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask again, did you have the information on your recommended knee pads?
Oh, you mean on which ones?
Yeah, there was something I thought you said were really good.
Well, if you go to their website, hold on, let me bring up the slideshow here and find.
Because I didn't catch how to find the data. Or it went by too fast or something.
Okay, they're called ProFlex. The ProFlex 355 are the large ones. And the 345s are the smaller. Now, we bought these a long time ago, so there may be different names, but it's the injected gel knee pads.
And okay, ProFlex 355.
Yeah, let me see if I can bring up the
The Ergodyne.
Yeah.
Ergodyne. Yeah, let me.
Is that like EU?
ERGODYNE. I just put it in the chat.
Yeah, it's in the chat in a couple of places, but you can see it right
I
now.
got it. Yeah, I thought I'd look that up because I've got serious knee problems, but sometimes I do need to get down, and I thought it might be helpful.
Oh yeah, it would definitely be helpful. It's like kneeling into stiff Jello, as I said, makes a huge difference.
Okay, thank you. Very wonderful program.
Oh, you're
You're welcome.
We
Thank
love,
you.
Really appreciate all your years and all your trials and tribulations to get all these lovely photos, and I've ordered the book.
Oh, thank
Oh,
you.
thank you. Thank you. Well, we love doing it. And like, I just wanted to make the point so strong. We're so grateful for CNPS, because this wouldn't have happened as easily or whatever without CNPS being there. So we're grateful for every one of you members. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
And if you're coming up for the conference, the CNPS conference, we put in a proposal to do a talk about using art to educate and inspire action. So we're hoping to be there.
Yeah.
Okay. Something to look forward to. Any other questions? Okay, well.
We try to anticipate them, but this is
Excuse
probably
me?
we try to anticipate the questions and answer them along the way, because we've done over 30 talks, I think, since the
Yeah, so you
book
really
came out. So
very thorough. Thank you so much. And
you're welcome.
I'll be in touch. I still have another question for you, but I'll send it to you in an email.
Oh, well, we can answer.
Well, it is to you personally. So,
Oh, okay.
okay. So I will email you and get an answer. So thanks everybody for attending, and we look forward to seeing you guys. Oh yeah, somebody's saying you have to drive to San Diego. Well, I had some ideas too. There might be venues, and I'll send you some ideas for
Oh,
venues
please.
for an
Yeah.
exhibitions. Okay.
Let me put in It's exhibitonvoy.com, and it gives you information about the exhibit.
.org.
.org, excuse me. .org, and it gives you information about the traveling exhibit so that you can, if there's someone you want to talk to about it, what the needs are.
Okay.
Because
Yeah,
it's been in
LA
San Bernardino County Museum, but not in LA proper. We'd love to see it.
Yeah.
there.
We'll
Or even
see.
the LA Natural History Museum, because we have ideas on how to make the exhibit more inclusive for the visually impaired with sound and three-dimensional flowers. So we're,
Okay, yeah, we need it in LA because we got more people here than
anywhere
know
else.
what to do with. Okay, good night, guys. Thanks so much.
Thank you,
Be
everyone.
in touch.
Oh, we got two people.
Uh-oh.
Leslie had her hand up.
Oh, Leslie?
Yeah. Can I ask a question?
Sure.
It was a while back, it was a shot that you had with these white sort of climbing flowers and then all these gangly kind of gray without much leaf trees behind them. And you talked about how you enhance, I think, the light and the color.
Right.
But I'm just curious, why did you leave all the, why the trees in the background? Was that part of the composition, part of the idea of climate change? And what were they? Because I couldn't tell.
The trees in the oak in the background were really beautiful. Were oak branches and oak trunks, and
You're talking about in the way background,
yeah.
all the way in
Yeah,
the background
right.
was like, was the fur in the sunlight, right?
You want to go
Probably.
back to the image?
Yeah, let me just bring it up real quick.
Yeah, let's look at it.
That one.
This one. So you're talking about the yellow ones right here, or the branches themselves?
Right. I was just talking about the branches. To me, they looked not very alive, and it was a real contrast with the flowers in the front.
Yeah, that's why I wanted to do that, to give the flowers some context of where it was they were growing in this really kind of chaotic environment. I love bringing chaos into a scene if I can bring some harmony to it. And so I just loved all the texture. I loved all the highlights on the lichen and everything, because some of the little shapes of the lichen kind of mirrored the shapes of the little flowers. So I was just fascinated with this scene because it seemed so difficult and so chaotic to photograph. But that's one of the challenges I like, is finding something that's really chaotic and seeing if I can bring some kind of order out of the chaos. So it may appeal to some people and it may not. But again, it was putting these flowers, putting the shrub into some context with the oak trees behind it.
So the oak trees are alive. They just don't have
Yeah.
much of leaf. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And this is in northern California, presumably? Or
This is
not?
in the Columbia River Gorge, on the Oregon side of the Columbia River Gorge.
Okay. And what were the flowers?
It's serviceberry.
Oh, okay. Wow. Great. Well, thank you. Yeah, that
Oh, you're
helps
welcome.
with a little more explanation.
Sure.
You're welcome. You're welcome. And Carolyn, you were done, correct, with your question?
Yeah, I'm good. And I was just looking that your exhibit was at the High Desert Nature Museum in Yucca Valley in the
Yeah.
past. I may have
Hmm.
seen it, but 2018 to 2019, I can't remember quite what I saw where. But
Yeah, we don't either.
I've been going to exhibits out there on a regular basis, so I may have seen it.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, good. Yeah, it's heading after the JCC in San Francisco, it's heading north to Yuba City,
Mhm.
to the Sutter Museum.
Yeah, that was interesting. I didn't actually realize where there was like a shopping store for the museums to find exhibits.
Yeah, their exhibit
wow.
envoys especially set up for small and medium-sized venues in California. And they have history exhibits and they have art exhibit, all types of exhibits.
Right.
Great organization to work with.
And where is it right now?
At the Jewish Community Center in San Francisco.
Okay.
So
I'm
mid-August,
in Ventura.
and then it's in San Diego.
Okay. And hopefully in LA after that, right?
Hopefully in LA.
Okay.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Any other questions, folks? All right. Thank you so much.
You're
and
welcome.
We look forward to seeing you at the conference in October.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks.
Bye-bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.